Amen. Beautiful singing, ladies. Beautiful singing. We'll be in the book of Exodus this evening. Exodus chapter 2. And I think everybody knows by now we're just going chapter by chapter here. We did that all through Genesis, and now we're going to do the same through Exodus. I do want to just take a moment just to tell the church thank you. Kind of like when I'm away, I just feel like putting everything on cruise control. You know, when you're in your car, you put it on cruise control, and hopefully you're still paying attention. But I feel like I am away. The church gets put on cruise control, and thankfully there's some people here that can grab the wheel still and steer it through the curves. And I just appreciate the men and the ladies and everybody. Just, I don't have to worry about it. And I appreciate that. I really do. So thank you for that. We're in Exodus chapter 2. And just something that I've noticed as we're reading through this. When we're reading through Genesis, if you notice that kind of in the background, the narrative, the story all through the book of Genesis, it followed the promised seed of the Messiah. That was all through Genesis. From Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Phares, all the way down. Well, from Adam all the way down, we followed that line. You can see that there. But Exodus kind of steps away from the line of the Messiah. Does anybody notice what line it picks up following, if you will, in Exodus? The Levites. The priesthood. Genesis, you're following the promised seed, and Exodus, we're following the priesthood. And I just find that interesting. Mainly, the book of Exodus covers, obviously, God's work through a specific Levite. And who was that? Moses. That's right, Moses. And we're going to read in chapter 2, and it's interesting because chapter 2, we're first introduced to Moses. But before Moses, along with Moses, three very important women, we're introduced to three very important women in the early life of Moses, or in the life of Moses. Three important women in this chapter. We're going to look at those three women here this evening. And so let's just read a few verses. And what we're going to do, we're just going to read a few verses. We're going to kind of look at another place in Scripture to help support it, and then try to make an application. All right, verse number 1, Exodus chapter 2. It says, "And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived, and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months." Just to make sure everybody's on the same page here, why did this woman hide her son? Yes, they were going to be put to death. The last part of chapter 1 ended with Pharaoh commanded that all the males be thrown into the river. They'd be killed, right? So verse number 3, it says, "And when she could not longer hide him," okay, "she took for him an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime, with pitch, and put the child therein. She laid it in the flags by the river's brink." Flags are, these reeds, like weeds there by the rivers. And his sister stood afar off to wit what will be done to him. So older sister's watching this baby just to see what's going to happen. Verse 5. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." The woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." All right, that's as far as we're going to read. So there's three women that we see in this first part of the chapter, and just go ahead and say it. Who are these three women? Somebody tell us. Who's the first one? Moses' sister, Pharaoh's daughter, and Mama. His mother's name, Jochebed. You have to look elsewhere in the Bible to find his dad's name, Amram. His sister, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter. I'm just going to call her his foster mother. Okay. And when I'm looking at this story that we just read, the first few verses, here's just some very simple truths I'm going to throw out there. These three women had a very important part in helping Moses become the man that God called him to be. I think we can say that. These three women helped Moses to become the man that God had called him to be. You say, "Well, I don't know about that." Well, if it wasn't for Miriam, there'd be no Moses, right? If it wasn't for his mama, there wouldn't be him either. And if it wasn't for Pharaoh's daughter, he wouldn't be either. So obviously, all three of these women had a big part in making Moses to be the man that God called him to be. Now, here's something interesting. Moses had no part whatsoever in choosing these women in his life. He had no part in that. He was a baby. That's very important. That's important to realize that. Moses had no part in placing these women in his life. So if Moses didn't have a part in placing these women in his life, who chose these women to be a part of Moses' family? God did. That kind of makes you think, I wouldn't have chose these same women, would you? What do you say that for, preacher? Well, Miriam wasn't perfect, was she? She had got a little jealous later on in the Bible. Miriam wasn't perfect, but God still chose her. Pharaoh's daughter, obviously, she wasn't perfect, but God chose her. She was a pagan. God can use all sorts of people, can't he? And they don't even know they're being used of God. So I'm trying to draw this here. God used these very imperfect people to help raise one of the greatest leaders that this world has ever known. Moses was a great leader. A great leader. And he used women like Jochebed, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter to help be the man that God called him to be. So let's try to make that relative to us. Who chose the family for you to be raised in? You ever think about that? You had no part in choosing your family. With all the good and with all the bad, God chose them for you. You might be a teenager here tonight and think, Mom, Dad, oh my. Why? God, why did you give me these parents? They're dumb. What'd you do? They all laugh. They can't keep it in. Why? Why did God give you the parents that He gave you? You know, why did God give Moses these women? Why did He put these women in his life? Why did God give you the family that you have today? Maybe because the people in your family have what you need to develop what God wants in you. I think it's safe to say that. Why do you have the family that you have? With all their good and with all their bad. God probably put you, I don't know if probably is even a safe word. I think God put you in that family with all their faults, with all their failures, with all the good, with all the bad, so that He can develop in you what's necessary for you to do what He's called you to do. I think it's safe to say that. Anybody here got a perfect family? You guys are all messed up. Moses didn't have a perfect family either. There's no such thing as a perfect family. So God takes something imperfect, like the people that you're raised around, and He uses them to develop what He wants to in you. I think it's safe to say that. Let's look at Jochebed here, his mother. What did Moses get from her that helped him later on in his life? He got something from her. Yes, let's see what Moses got from his mother. Remember, I'm trying to build on this. God put Moses in the family that he was in. The people, especially the women here that he was raised around, they gave him something that he took with him the rest of his life. Let's look at some of these things. Jochebed, I think it's Jochebed. Let's look here. And there went a man of the house of Levi, chapter 2, verse 1, and took to wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months, and when she could not longer hide him, she took from an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime, with pitch, put the child therein, she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. I want to point out Jochebed's faith. Jochebed's faith. Think about this. Moses was conceived under a death sentence. All the sons are going to be thrown in the river. They're all dead. He was conceived under a death sentence. She knew beforehand that there was a chance of her child being killed. Yet she still conceived a child. What are you saying? I'm saying by faith, this woman, this mother, trusted God. She trusted the Lord. Let me show you something. If you hold your place here in Exodus 2, let's go to the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 13. Hold your place here. Let's look in Hebrews. And I want to try to show you something here that might help you to understand this truth. Hebrews chapter 13. And we're just going to pull a couple verses. We're going to look in verse 5. But the main point is going to be found in verse 6. Hebrews chapter 13, verse number 5. I'm trying to show you Jochebed's faith. Hebrews 13, verse 5 says, let your conversation be without covetousness. You know, just your lifestyle, the way you live your life. Let it be without covetousness. And then it goes on and says, be content with such things as you have. Okay. And here's the truth. This is why we should live our lives with contentment. Because God said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And then once you get that truth established in your heart, look what verse number 6 says. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. When you look at verse 5 and verse number 6, there's two things that go together. Verse number 5 points out the truth that God will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That's God's presence. And if you've got God's presence, you can have what verse number 6 says, or you won't have fear. You'll have boldness. I will not fear what man shall do unto me. So what's that got to do with Jochebed? Well, Jochebed knew that God would never leave her nor forsake her. Therefore, she wasn't afraid of Pharaoh. She wasn't afraid of his commandment, what he said. What's that got to do with Moses? Listen, she passed that faith on to Moses. So when Moses became a man, he could stand before Pharaoh and say, God said, let my people go. She wasn't afraid of Pharaoh. And when he became a man, because he knew he had God's presence, he wasn't afraid of Pharaoh either. Jochebed was his example early on in his life. I think that's pretty good. I think that's real. Here she is. In this act of conceiving this child under a death sentence, she was saying, I'm not afraid of that man. God's with me. He's already told his people. He's already said he's going to bless us and multiply us. I know this is right to have children. I know this. I'm doing what's right in God's eyes. Therefore, I'm not going to be afraid of what this guy says. And God was with her. And God honored that. Her faith. She wasn't afraid of Pharaoh, and Moses wasn't either. Jochebed's faith, if you will, became Moses' faith. Let's look back in Exodus chapter 2. We'll look at the next person. You know, moms, your faith is an example to your children. They see your faith. They see your battles. They see your struggles. They see your victories. They see your failures. But let this be an encouragement to be faithful. Don't be afraid of man, but fear God and follow him. Just like Jochebed did. All right, here's the next one. That's the first woman we see here. The next one, look what it says in verse number 6. This is Pharaoh's daughter. Moses' mom was an example of faith. Pharaoh's daughter. Well, I'll show you. Let's read the verses first. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. Her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child. And behold, look what happened just at the right time. The babe wept. And when that little baby started crying, it did something in this woman's heart. You see what it is, ladies? And she had compassion on him. Compassion, that's an interesting sympathy and concern for the sufferings of others. She saw that baby squalling. She knew it was one of those Hebrew baby boys that her dad ordered to be killed. And when she saw that baby and heard that baby cry, it just tore at her heart. I don't know how moms think, but no doubt she's thinking, he's crying for his mother. Or maybe he's crying because he's hungry. Or maybe he just wants to be held. Or maybe he needs to be changed. Whatever it was, she was putting herself in that baby's position, giving sympathy towards that child. I mean, folks, that's something. Pharaoh's daughter had something that really few people today have. And she was a pagan. And there's mothers all over this country, all over the world today that'll have an abortion just like that and won't think anything twice of it. Abortion is the exact opposite of having compassion. And here this woman, her heart, she saw him and she had compassion towards him. All right, that's what this woman showed toward Moses. Let me ask you this. In Moses' life, later on, when he became that great leader to deliver Israel, did Moses ever have compassion on people? You better believe it. I'm just trying to make this point. She showed him compassion. And when Moses became a man, he also showed compassion on people. Matter of fact, it's interesting. Look in Numbers. Exodus, we're in Exodus, go to Leviticus, Numbers chapter 12. It's interesting because in this chapter, he's showing compassion towards his older sister. Many, many, many years later here. And this is the same Miriam that we're going to look at in just a moment. We're going to look at her in a minute here. This is his older sister and brother. And it says, in Numbers 12, verse 1, it says, Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And notice what they begin to say. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And somebody was listening when they said that. You see who it is in verse 2? The Lord heard it. And then here's this little statement made in verse 3 about Moses. You got to put yourself in the poor guy's shoes here. He's trying to lead a rebellious nation. And people are murmuring and complaining about him. And it says this about Moses. Now the man Moses was meek. Is that what it says? He was really, really meek. Now the man Moses was very meek. And that's not in the negative. Above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And folks, that is a quality of leadership. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam. Come out ye three unto the tabernacle of the congregation, and they three came out. Well, you talk about getting a lump in your throat about that time. Kids, you get scared when mom and dad say, calls you and your siblings, you kids get in here. Stand before me. Dad calls you in there because he's going to try to get to the bottom of something. If you're guilty, you know it's not going to be good. And here comes Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, and they're before God. Verse 5 says, the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle, called Aaron and Miriam. They both came forth. Now he singled them two out, said, you two get over here. I'm done yet. I'd be scared. And he said, hear now my words. God, see, Moses is so meek. God stands up for him here in verse 6. And folks, there's a lesson to be learned. If you're doing what's right, you really don't have to stand up for yourself. God will vindicate you. He'll validate you later on. God can do it. And anyway, I'm going to get on a rabbit trail if I don't move. And he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision and will speak unto him in a dream. But he says, in contrast to that, he says, my servant Moses is not so. Who's faithful in all mine house, with him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently. He said, just like I'm doing now is what God's saying. And not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Boy, he's boom. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against him, and he departed. Kids, your mom and dad ever get so mad they're talking to you and they get so mad and they just got to walk out of the room? I'm not saying God got so mad he was getting ready to lose it, but he was angry and he was mad and he was hot. He left. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, look what happened. Miriam became leprous, white as snow. Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not this sin upon us, wherein we've done foolishly, and wherein we've sinned. And look what God does. These people are trying to stand up against Moses, and God makes a circumstance, a situation, where they have to call on Moses for help. I mean, they were just a few minutes ago, they were saying, hey, we're prophets too. And now God puts them in a situation where they have to call on Moses for help. Isn't it funny how God works sometimes? He says, we've sinned in verse 11. But verse 12, he says, let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed. Leprosy is a horrible disease. When he cometh out of his mother's womb. And look what it says in verse 13. We're talking about Pharaoh's daughter. Remember, she had compassion on Moses. And then Moses becomes a man, and now we can see him having compassion on others. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And so Moses is petitioning. He's got compassion on his sister. He doesn't want to see her life wasted away by the horrible disease of leprosy. So he's pleading with God for her. Moses is quick to ask forgiveness, but in verse 14 you'll notice that God is not so quick in delivering his forgiveness right here. He says, let her bake a while. Let her soak in it. And the Lord said unto Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed at 7 days? Let her be shut up from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days. And the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again, and afterward the people were moved. And so what we're seeing there, Moses showed compassion. And God just said, I'm not going to heal her. I'll heal her, but it's not going to be today. Give her a week. Let her think about it. All right, last one. Moses' daughter showed compassion. I believe it was passed on to Moses. Moses showed compassion later on in his life. It's just interesting. In verse number 7 of Exodus chapter 2, here's the last one. And obviously this is Moses' older sister. Verse 7 says, then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter. Now what we're going to see about Miriam, I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out the bag before we read the verses. We're going to see Miriam's intercession and Miriam's wittiness. Boy, that was a sharp young girl when you see what she did. She was bright. I mean, she had some wits to her. Quick thinker. I'm telling you, I'm not a quick thinker. Amy, she's a lot better. She's got those wits. I mean, God put us in balance. I need it. when I can't confront and argue. I've got to sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and think about it and scratch it off. Miriam, she interceded, and she was very witty. Verse 7. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter grabs Moses, and Moses' sister comes up to Pharaoh's daughter and says, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And so Pharaoh's daughter says, "Hey, that's a great idea." And verse 8, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go, and of all the women who lost a child, look who Miriam got." And the maid went and called the child's mother. Now here, poor old Jochebed, what did she just give up? She gave up her son. And it was an act of faith, trusting God. And I wonder what she thought when Miriam come back home and said, "Mom, guess what?" Not only guess what, but there's more. And here it is. And the maid went and called the child's mother, in verse 8, and Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, okay, here comes Jochebed. She's now in the presence of Pharaoh's daughter. And look what all transpired. Look what all happened. Take this child away and nurse it for me, but that's not all. And I will give thee thy wages. Don't tell me he doesn't pay to serve God. And the woman took the child and nursed it. So Miriam, she's little Moses, he can't defend himself. So I'm saying Miriam, she's interceding on Moses' behalf. Later on in Moses' life, did he ever intercede for anybody? Boy, he was a great interceder. Time and time and time again, the children of Israel sinned against God. God was going to kill them. Moses stepped in and interceded on their behalf. I'm not going to, at Numbers 14, there's a great example. I don't think we're going to turn there. But you'll see Moses' wittiness in how he intercedes. Because I'm really going to summarize it, because he says, God, if you kill them, then this is what the other people, this is what the Egyptians are going to think. This is what the heathens are going to think. That you took them out of Egypt, but you couldn't deliver them. So he's witty in his intercession, just like Miriam was. Moses interceded. Last of all, I want us to see God's rewards for this. There's 3 women in Moses' life. He didn't choose them. God chose them for him. To develop something in him. To help make him the man God wanted him to be. Look in verse number 9 again. Not only did Jochebed get her child back, that was the reward. She got her son back. But then she also got paid to take care of him. And they would nurse a child for several years. Not uncommon, 3 years. Not uncommon. But notice how God rewarded Jochebed for her faith. He gave her provision. Now I know I know God's the one doing this, but think on a lower level. Who's the one providing for Jochebed here? We know it's God, but let's tone it down. Who's providing for Jochebed? Who's really paying her? Pharaoh is. The very one that said kill him. But think about this. Not only is Pharaoh paying for this child to be raised. But he's also protecting this child from being killed. God's provision and God's protection being provided by Pharaoh. That's a reward for her faith in obeying God. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Because I'm sure that after God delivered Moses here, this horrible practice of throwing these boys in the river continued on. But God was protecting Moses and providing for Moses by the very one that set out to kill him. Kill the boys. So God rewarded Jochebed with a son. He rewarded Pharaoh's daughter. Look at this in Exodus 2 in verse number 10. And the child grew and she brought unto him, and the child grew and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter. And look at this phrase. Not only did Moses' mom get her son back, but Pharaoh's daughter was even rewarded. Look what she got out of it in the middle of verse 10. Do you see what she got? What is it? She got a son. And he became her son. And she got to name him. And she called his name Moses. So God rewarded Pharaoh's daughter with a son. And Miriam, she had her brother restored. But not only did she get a brother, but that brother that she protected there and interceded for, that brother grew up to be her deliverer. God's rewards. Again, don't tell me it doesn't pay to serve God. All right, let's stand and we'll close. When we go back to chapter 1 closed with a reminder that it pays to serve God. Remember the midwives? The Bible says God built them homes. He rewarded them with a family. That's how chapter 1 ended. Chapter 2 begins with another reminder that it pays to serve God. Through Jochebed, Pharaoh's daughter, and Miriam. And we're standing, our heads about them. We're going to pray. Listen, God has put people in your life to make you into the person He wants you to be. And the only right response to that is to be thankful and don't be afraid to live for God. Just like Jochebed, don't be afraid of man. Live for God.